Welcome to DeepRest, your place to relax and unwind. Subscribe now and join us for peaceful moments.
To live in medieval Europe was to exist within a fragile web of power, faith, and survival, where everything from birth to death was dictated by a rigid social structure, the land you were born on, and a feudal system that bound people like invisible chains. The world was one of vast landscapes, but most people never traveled farther than the village they were born in. This was a time long before modern technology, where communication was slow, transportation was difficult, and understanding of the world was limited by ignorance and superstition. Life in medieval Europe was shaped by these harsh realities, where survival was an everyday battle against the elements, the state of your crops, disease, and the very authority that ruled you. For peasants, life was simple yet brutal, spent working the land and serving the needs of their lord. Most peasants worked as serfs, bound to the land they worked on, and required to give a significant portion of their harvest to the landowner. In exchange, the lord would offer protection from invaders, manage justice, and ensure the peasants' right to live and work on the land. However, the deal was hardly equitable. Serfs had little to no rights, and most lived in perpetual poverty, seeing little of the wealth they produced. Their homes were humble, made from wood, mud, or stone, often overcrowded with extended family members. Inside, a small hearth provided warmth, but the air was always thick with smoke, as ventilation was poor and hygiene practically non-existent. The harsh winters meant that the peasants had to huddle together to survive the cold. Life expectancy was short, and many children did not live to see adulthood, often succumbing to disease or malnutrition before they reached the age of 10. Yet, despite the grinding labor and miserable living conditions, medieval peasants held on to something far greater than material wealth: faith. Christianity was not just a religion, it was the foundation upon which medieval Europe rested. Every aspect of life was governed by the Church, from birth to marriage to death and everything in between. The Church was an omnipresent force, shaping the moral and social order. For many peasants, their existence was defined by their belief that their suffering in this life would lead to salvation in the afterlife, a comfort that gave them the strength to endure. The local parish church was the center of village life, where villagers would gather to pray, listen to sermons, and participate in religious festivals. Church bells rang regularly, not just to mark the passage of time, but to remind the villagers of the eternal connection they shared with the divine. The priests, often the only literate members of the community, were the mediators between the earthly and the divine, interpreting God's will and ensuring that the souls of the people remained on the path of righteousness.
Above the peasants, a rigid feudal hierarchy governed the lives of nobles and kings. The lords and ladies who ruled over the land lived in castles made of stone, towering fortresses designed to protect them from invaders. The castles were cold, dark, and damp, yet they symbolized power. Castles were not only homes, but they were military strongholds that could withstand sieges and battles. The nobility had the luxury of leisure, of feasting, of dress, and of power. They were educated and lived a life of privilege compared to the peasants. Lords would hold lavish banquets, surrounded by knights and noblemen, discussing matters of governance, war, and religion. Their lifestyle was marked by wealth, and their power was not just derived from the land they owned, but from their military might and alliances. They waged wars against one another, fought for land and power, and established dynastic rules that shaped the fate of entire kingdoms. For the peasants, however, the nobles were often distant and abstract figures, their lives mostly untouched by the human dramas of war and politics that consumed the ruling class. Knighthood was perhaps the most romanticized class of all, and while chivalric codes of honor,
bravery and loyalty were espoused in legend, in reality, knights were warriors first and foremost. They fought in wars, protected their lords, and participated in tournaments. Their training began at a young age, often as page boys, before becoming squires, and finally, knights. Armed with swords, shields, and heavy armor, they were the warriors who protected the nobility. However, their code of conduct, which idealized protection of the weak and valor in battle, often did not match the harsh realities of medieval warfare. Knights fought in brutal, bloody battles that left many dead or wounded, and the suffering of civilians was often ignored in the pursuit of victory. Chivalry was not always practiced on the battlefield, but rather when it was convenient for the lords or kings they served. Knights were seen as heroes in their communities, and their role as defenders of faith and lord was a source of great pride. Though feudalism shaped the social order of medieval Europe, not all people accepted this hierarchical structure. Over time, the economic system began to evolve, particularly with the rise of towns and cities, which were becoming more central to the medieval world. The growth of trade, markets, and merchant classes marked the beginning of a slow but steady shift in power. While nobles and lords continued to rule the land, those who controlled trade and finances began to gain influence. Markets were places of activity where merchants sold goods from across the known world. These goods ranged from spices, cloth, and metals to books and religious icons. Towns, though often unsanitary and dangerous, offered a level of social mobility that rural peasants could never imagine. It was in the towns that the first forms of capitalism began to emerge, with guilds forming to control production and establish standards for goods. Wealth, though not as common as it would later become, started to trickle into the hands of the few who could wield it effectively. Yet medieval Europe was far from peaceful. Despite the growth of cities, trade, and education, the landscape was still scarred by violence. War was ever present, from the Norman conquest of England to the 100 Years' War between England and France. The battles for land, resources, and power were endless. Entire regions were ravaged, villages destroyed, and crops burned. Feudal lords raised armies to defend or conquer lands, and the common folk were often caught in the crossfire. Castles stood as symbols of power, but they also became prisons during times of conflict, with peasants and villagers forced into them for protection or pressed into service as soldiers. At the same time, the Church continued to exercise tremendous influence over European life. The medieval period is often characterized by the dominance of religion, the Catholic Church to be specific. Popes held sway over kings and emperors, their word seen as the word of God. The Church's power was immense. It controlled much of Europe's wealth, knowledge, and education. It was the Church that offered the only formal education to most, and it was the Church that decided who would live or die in both spiritual and sometimes legal terms. Excommunication, the threat of eternal damnation, was a powerful weapon used by the Church to maintain order, while the promise of salvation kept the medieval population deeply loyal to their faith. The medieval world, despite its hardships, its darkness, and its violence, was also a world of great faith, resilience, and hope. It was a world where survival was the most important goal, where one's place in society was set by birth, and where the balance between fear and faith dictated how people lived, fought, and died. It was a time of great suffering, but also of quiet, enduring strength. People believed that they were part of a larger cosmic order, one that was governed by divine forces, and that their suffering on earth was only temporary, meant to be endured in preparation for the afterlife. And while much of the world was consumed by brutality, superstition, and poverty, medieval Europeans clung to the hope that a better world awaited them, a world of peace, prosperity, and eternal life. If rural medieval life was defined by the rhythm of the seasons and endless labor under the open sky, urban life in medieval Europe unfolded beneath looming stone walls, narrow streets, and an ever-present sense of danger as towns and cities slowly expanded from former Roman settlements or trade crossroads into dense, chaotic centers of commerce, craft, faith, and disease, where opportunity and suffering coexisted in close quarters, and where the sounds of hammering blacksmiths, shouting merchants, ringing church bells, and crying children blended into a constant, restless noise that rarely faded. Medieval cities were enclosed by defensive walls meant to protect inhabitants from invasion, yet those same walls trapped smoke, filth, waste, and illness inside, creating environments where sanitation was nearly non-existent. Streets were unpaved and muddy, and human and animal waste was routinely dumped into open drains or simply thrown into the streets, contaminating water supplies and turning rivers into slow-moving carriers of disease, while rats thrived among refuse and food scraps, unknowingly carrying fleas that would one day reshape the fate of an entire continent. Homes in these cities were tightly packed, often built of wood, with overhanging upper floors that blocked sunlight, leaving streets dim and damp even at midday. And inside these houses, families lived crowded together, sharing space with tools, animals, and stored goods, breathing air thick with smoke from hearth fires that rarely went out, because warmth and cooking depended on them. Despite these conditions, cities attracted people from the countryside because they offered something rare in the medieval world, the possibility, however slim, of social mobility, as free towns allowed serfs who lived there for a certain number of years to escape feudal bondage, giving rise to a growing class of artisans, craftsmen, and merchants whose livelihoods depended not on land, but on skill, trade, and money. Guilds emerged as powerful organizations that regulated professions such as weaving, baking, metalworking, carpentry, and brewing, controlling quality, prices, training, and membership, offering stability and identity to those within, while fiercely excluding outsiders, reinforcing social divisions even as they weakened feudal control. Yet city life remained brutally fragile, as fires frequently swept through districts built mostly of wood and straw, destroying entire neighborhoods in hours, leaving families homeless and destitute, while crime flourished in poorly lit streets, prompting harsh laws and public punishments designed to maintain order through fear rather than rehabilitation, with executions, floggings, and mutilations carried out in public squares as grim spectacles meant to warn others. Above all threats, however, none shaped medieval urban consciousness more deeply than disease, especially during the catastrophic arrival of the Black Death in the mid-14th century, when a plague of unimaginable scale swept through Europe along trade routes, striking cities with terrifying speed, killing rich and poor alike, sparing neither kings nor beggars, as victims developed fever, swelling, blackened skin, and died within days, overwhelming families, churches, and burial grounds, leaving corpses piled in streets and mass graves hastily dug outside city walls, while the living struggled to comprehend the magnitude of loss. Medieval medicine, lacking knowledge of bacteria or contagion, offered little defense, relying on theories of bodily humors, astrology, herbal remedies, bloodletting, and prayer, while physicians wore masks filled with aromatic herbs to ward off what they believed were poisonous airs, and barber surgeons performed crude procedures without anesthesia or sterilization, making treatment as dangerous as the illness itself. As the plague spread, fear turned into hysteria, with some communities blaming minorities, foreigners, or supposed heretics, leading to violence and persecution, while others turned inward, seeking divine forgiveness through extreme piety, processions, fasting, and self-flagellation, believing the plague was God's punishment for humanity's sins. The Church, long seen as the ultimate source of spiritual authority, struggled to provide answers, as priests themselves died in vast numbers while administering last rites. Monasteries were emptied and faith was shaken. Yet religion remained central as people clung to the hope of salvation in a world where death felt omnipresent and unavoidable. Paradoxically, the devastation of the plague also transformed medieval society in lasting ways, because the massive loss of life created labor shortages that shifted economic power, allowing surviving workers to demand higher wages and better conditions, challenging the rigid feudal hierarchy and prompting authorities to impose laws attempting to freeze wages and restrict movement, often unsuccessfully. Cities slowly recovered, rebuilding homes, markets, and institutions, and over time became centers of learning and innovation as universities grew. Literacy expanded among merchants and professionals, and new ideas circulated more freely through written texts and public debate. Daily life in medieval cities remained harsh, with high infant mortality, frequent illness, and constant uncertainty, yet people adapted with resilience, developing strong communal bonds, celebrating festivals, attending markets, and finding moments of joy and music, storytelling, and religious rituals, while children began working at young ages as apprentices or laborers, and women contributed significantly to urban economies as traders, brewers, midwives, and textile workers, even as legal and social systems limited their autonomy. The medieval city was a place of contradiction, where death was never far away, yet life persisted with stubborn intensity, where suffering coexisted with ambition, and where the collective trauma of plague and hardship gradually reshaped European society, pushing it toward transformation, awakening new questions about authority, faith, labor, and the value of human life, setting the stage for the profound changes that would eventually pull Europe out of the medieval world and toward a new age. Medieval Europe was, at its core, a world built for conflict, where power was measured not by laws or institutions as we understand them today, but by land ownership, military strength, and the ability to command loyalty through fear, tradition, and force. And nowhere was this reality more visible than in the dominance of castles, kings, and constant warfare that shaped the political and social landscape of the Middle Ages. Castles rose across the continent as physical manifestations of authority, constructed from stone and positioned on hills, river crossings, or strategic roads. Their thick walls, towers, battlements, moats, and iron gates designed to withstand sieges and intimidate anyone who approached, serving simultaneously as military fortresses, administrative centers, and residences for the ruling elite, while also acting as grim reminders to surrounding villages that power was concentrated, defended, and absolute. Life inside these castles was far removed from the romantic imagery later centuries would imagine, as cold stone halls were damp, dark, and filled with smoke from hearth fires that barely warmed the air. Floors were strewn with straw and rushes that absorbed filth and odors, and privacy was rare. Yet these fortresses remained the nerve centers of medieval rule, where lords dispensed justice, collected taxes, planned military campaigns, and reinforced their dominance over the land and the people who worked it. Above the lords stood kings, whose authority varied greatly depending on region and period. As medieval monarchy was often unstable, contested, and deeply personal, relying less on centralized bureaucracy and more on feudal bonds of loyalty, marriage alliances, religious legitimacy, and military success, meaning that a king who failed to defend his realm or reward his supporters risked rebellion, deposition, or assassination, while succession crises were common, plunging kingdoms into civil war as rival heirs, nobles, and factions fought for control. Feudalism formed the backbone of this political system, binding society together through a network of obligations where land was granted in exchange for military service, and knights, trained from childhood to fight, served as the professional warriors of this age, sworn to protect their lord and uphold his interests, their lives dominated by preparation for combat, tournaments, and warfare, while their equipment, swords, lances, shields, chainmail, and later plate armor, represented both technological advancement and enormous expense, reinforcing their status as an elite class. The ideal of chivalry emerged as both a moral code and a propaganda tool, promoting values such as honor, loyalty, bravery, and the protection of the weak. Yet in practice, medieval warfare was brutal, chaotic, and merciless. Battles decided by terrain, numbers, and endurance rather than noble ideals, and civilians frequently suffered the consequences as armies pillaged villages, burned crops, and seized livestock to sustain themselves, leaving peasant populations devastated and displaced. Sieges were among the most common forms of warfare, as attacking a fortified castle directly was costly and dangerous. So armies instead surrounded fortresses for months or even years, cutting off supplies, spreading disease, and attempting to starve defenders into surrender, while inside the walls, inhabitants endured hunger, fear, and despair, sometimes resorting to extreme measures to survive. And when castles finally fell, the aftermath could be devastating, with massacres, looting, and destruction serving as warnings to others. Religion played a central role in legitimizing warfare, as kings and nobles frequently claimed divine approval for their campaigns, framing conflicts as righteous or ordained by God, a belief that reached its most dramatic expression in the Crusades, a series of religious wars launched by Christian Europe to reclaim holy lands, which mobilized vast numbers of knights, peasants, and clergy, blending genuine religious devotion with political ambition, economic motives, and cultural hostility. And while the Crusades opened new trade routes and intensified contact between Europe and the wider world, they also unleashed extraordinary violence, massacres, and long-lasting animosity between cultures. Within Europe itself, warfare was nearly constant as rival kingdoms, duchies, and city-states competed for territory and influence, with conflicts such as the 100 Years' War between England and France lasting generations, reshaping national identities while draining resources and lives. And during these prolonged wars, military technology slowly evolved with the introduction of longbows, crossbows, improved fortifications, and eventually gunpowder weapons, beginning to undermine the dominance of knights and castles, signaling the gradual decline of the feudal military order. Justice in this world was harsh and uneven, administered by lords through manorial courts, where punishments were severe and public, reflecting a belief that fear was necessary to maintain order, while trial by ordeal or combat persisted in some regions, based on the idea that God would reveal truth through suffering or victory, reinforcing the deep intertwining of religion and authority. Women within noble households wielded limited but significant influence, managing estates during their husband's absence, arranging marriages, and acting as patrons of culture and religion, though their power remained constrained by patriarchal norms and legal restrictions, while common women endured heavy labor, vulnerability to violence, and strict social expectations. Despite the dominance of warfare and hierarchy, medieval political life was not entirely static, as tensions between kings and nobles, the growing influence of towns, and the economic consequences of war and plague slowly weakened feudal bonds, forcing rulers to negotiate, compromise, and adapt, laying early foundations for centralized states and new forms of governance. Medieval Europe existed in a constant state of tension between order and chaos, authority and rebellion, faith and fear, where power was always contested and rarely secure, and where the lives of millions were shaped by decisions made behind castle walls, on battlefields soaked with blood, and in the name of kings and gods, creating a world defined by resilience, violence, loyalty, and the relentless struggle to survive in an age where peace was temporary and war was a way of life. As medieval Europe endured centuries of hardship, violence, disease, and rigid hierarchy, its people found meaning, structure, and endurance through faith, routine, and tradition, creating a worldview where the divine was inseparable from everyday life and where existence itself was understood as a temporary passage toward eternity. Because from the poorest peasant to the most powerful king, nearly everyone believed that God actively shaped the world, rewarding obedience and punishing sin, and this belief infused every aspect of medieval life, from the rhythm of the day marked by church bells to the calendar structured around religious festivals, fasting periods, saints' days, and holy rituals that provided moments of collective identity and emotional relief. The church stood at the center of medieval society as both a spiritual authority and a powerful institution, owning vast amounts of land, collecting tithes, influencing kings, and controlling education, morality, and social norms, while parish churches served as communal spaces where people gathered not only to worship, but to exchange news, celebrate milestones, and mourn losses, reinforcing social bonds in a world where survival depended heavily on cooperation and shared belief. Monasteries and convents played a unique role, offering rare centers of learning, discipline, and stability, where monks and nuns dedicated their lives to prayer, manual labor, and the preservation of knowledge, copying manuscripts by hand, safeguarding classical texts, developing agricultural techniques, and providing limited medical care, all while living under strict rules that emphasized obedience, humility, and withdrawal from worldly temptation. For most medieval people, literacy remained rare, and knowledge was transmitted orally through sermons, storytelling, songs, visual art, and religious imagery, making churches filled with stained glass windows, frescoes, and sculptures powerful tools of education, depicting biblical stories, moral lessons, heaven, hell, angels, demons, and the final judgment in vivid detail that shaped the medieval imagination and reinforced the belief that earthly actions had eternal consequences. Daily life followed repetitive patterns shaped by labor, weather, and tradition, as peasants worked fields from dawn to dusk, artisans labored in workshops, women managed households, food preparation, childcare, and supplementary work, and children were introduced early to responsibilities with little separation between childhood and adulthood, because survival demanded contribution from everyone. Despite hardship, medieval life was not devoid of joy, as people celebrated weddings, births, harvests, and religious festivals with music, dancing, feasting, and communal games, finding moments of laughter and connection that offered respite from constant uncertainty. While traveling performers, minstrels, and storytellers brought entertainment and news from distant regions, weaving imagination into a world otherwise constrained by routine. Medieval culture placed immense value on symbols, rituals, and collective memory, with legends, saints' lives, heroic epics, and moral tales reinforcing social values such as loyalty, faith, courage, and endurance, even as superstition and fear of the supernatural remained strong, leading people to believe in omens, curses, witches, and divine signs that explained misfortune in a universe still poorly understood through science. Death was a constant presence, shaping medieval psychology in profound ways, as high mortality rates, frequent epidemics, and limited medical knowledge meant that few families escaped loss, encouraging a worldview that emphasized preparation for the afterlife over material success. And this preoccupation with mortality was reflected in art and literature, filled with images of skulls, judgment themes, and reminders of life's fragility, reinforcing humility and obedience. Over time, however, the medieval world began to change, driven by forces that slowly undermined its foundations, as population recovery after the plague altered labor dynamics. Urban growth expanded trade networks, and increasing contact with other cultures through commerce and conflict introduced new ideas, technologies, and perspectives, while universities grew in importance, fostering debate, logic, philosophy, and early scientific inquiry that challenged purely theological explanations of reality. The authority of the Church, though still immense, began to face criticism due to corruption, wealth inequality, and internal divisions, planting early seeds of reform that questioned whether spiritual power should dominate all aspects of life. While monarchs gradually strengthened centralized control, reducing the independence of feudal lords and laying groundwork for nation-states governed by law rather than personal allegiance, art and architecture evolved as well, moving from purely religious symbolism toward greater realism, human emotion, and individual expression, particularly in late medieval painting and sculpture, signaling a subtle shift in how people perceived themselves, not just as sinners awaiting judgment, but as individuals with unique experiences and potential. By the late Middle Ages, Europe stood on the edge of transformation, still deeply rooted in medieval structures, yet increasingly pulled toward change by economic growth, intellectual curiosity, and social tension. Unaware that the familiar world of feudal bonds, unquestioned authority, and sacred hierarchy was slowly dissolving, giving way to a new era that would redefine humanity's relationship with knowledge, power, and the universe itself. The medieval period, often remembered only for its darkness and suffering, was in truth a complex age of endurance, faith, creativity, and adaptation, a civilization that survived against overwhelming odds and laid the foundations for the modern world, proving that even in times of fear, ignorance, and hardship, human societies continue to imagine, believe, build, and hope, carrying the past forward into an uncertain but ever-evolving